Ahoy hoy, this is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games, we like roguelikes, and we like the devices that bring them to us. So the Monday right after Christmas, I got this package in the mail that I wasn't expecting for some time, but this box actually contains the PCB upgrade to take my Retroid Pocket 2 and make it into a Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. And I'm actually very excited about this because the Retroid Pocket 2 was one of my first handhelds from when I first started to get into this retro handheld collecting hobby. My first was the RetroFlag GPI case, which I'm going to talk about that in a future video. Now, I got the Retroid Pocket 2 before I started making YouTube videos. However, had I done a review on that device, I would have said that it had fallen short in a lot of areas. And once I started picking up other handheld devices, the Retroid Pocket 2 just kind of sat in my office for a good long time. So we're going to use this PCB upgrade and we're going to take that device and we're going to make it better. Now, if you bought the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus already assembled, you're going to have a touchscreen on your model, but I opted not to swap out my screen because I'm already nervous enough with opening up my Retroid Pocket 2 and tearing it apart without breaking it. I'm actually very nervous when it comes to opening up these electronic devices, but we're gonna do it anyway. And that's what the first half of this video is going to be about. We're going to show you how exactly to take apart the Retroid Pocket 2 and install this new PCB if you opted to upgrade your existing unit rather than buy a whole new unit. And we're gonna put in the new buttons and the new membranes in while we're at it. And the second half of this video is going to be doing some testing and putting the system through its paces and really seeing how much an improvement this is over the original Retroid Pocket 2 and where it still falls short in some areas. Now, because this video is part tutorial and part gameplay and impressions, it's gonna be kind of a long one. I like to try to keep my videos around 15-20 minutes, but we're approaching a whopping 40 minutes for this particular product. So I'm going to make sure I leave timestamps when I publish this video. So if you're only interested in the tutorial on how to install the PCB, you could skip to that part. And if you're only interested in seeing gameplay and emulator performance, then you could skip to that part. That said, here's what the new PCB looks like. It's very similar in design to the original, which is great because we're going to be salvaging a lot of the original internals from my Retroid Pocket 2. So that's enough of me droning on about this product. Let's jump in and let's get this thing installed. So here's my original Retroid Pocket 2. I can't believe I bought this a little under a year ago. And let's go ahead and start taking this apart. I'm going to start by taking off these Pokeball analog covers. I'm actually not going to replace them in the new build. And I'm going to take the pad right off of the digital nub. And I'm going to turn the unit on its back. I'm going to put a piece of foam from the packaging right here just so I don't damage the glass. I do have a screen protector on the glass though, so we should be fine. Now the back screws are protected by these foam inserts, so we need to go ahead and take those out. I'm going to try and do this with only the tools that were included in the box. So I'm going to take the screwdriver and I'm just going to kind of wedge it in between the nub and the unit, and I'm just going to pry out the protective foam. And it should push up a little bit. You might be able to get the foam out with the included tweezers, but those tweezers aren't really that great, so I ended up just using my fingers. And you want to do that with all 4 of these protective nubs. Really quick, before I go any further, I'm just going to take my SD card out of the unit so we don't run into trouble getting this out later. And I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to need to reformat it and put some ROM files on that later on. And using the screwdriver, I'm going to go ahead and take these 4 screws out. Just make sure you set them aside, you will need them later. Now grab the included tweezers and you just want to go under the ZR button and you just want to gently pry the back panel just a little bit so that you can get the included guitar pick in between the back panel and the unit. And you just want to gently move the guitar pick across the unit, and what you're going to actually do is you're going to unclip and pry this panel off. Now, if you're careful, you can do it without breaking any of the clips like I did here, but if you do break a couple, don't worry because the screws will hold this in place when we're done. Now let's go ahead and take out this screw on the PCB right by the battery connection. Just be careful not to pull the back cover too far back while you're unscrewing this because you don't want to ruin the wires connecting the battery to the unit. And once you've gotten this screw out, you should be able to disconnect the battery with no issue. Just keep in mind that screw holds the connector in place, so if you don't take it out, you're going to struggle to disconnect the battery. And let's set the back panel aside for now. Alright, next step is to disconnect the ZL and ZR buttons, and they are held in by 2 screws each, so let's go ahead and take those screws out and remove the buttons. And once you've done that, you could just slide the L and R buttons out as well and set those aside. Now there's 4 more screws right on the board. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take those out as well. Once we're done with that, you could just use your hands to gently pull out the speaker connectors, and you can set those aside. Just don't lose them because we will be reusing them later. Alright, now comes the hard part. We need to disconnect the ribbon cable connecting the left analog stick and the screen, and we have to do this carefully so as not to break these fragile cables. So we're going to grab the included tweezers. Make sure you lift the lid first. There is a small black lid keeping these ribbon cables in place. And just using these tweezers, you're going to gently nurse these ribbon cables out of place. Now, I sped this footage up because I went really slow in this process because I did not want to break these cables. But after much finesse, I finally disconnected the left analog stick. So now I'm going to go ahead and lift the lid, keeping the screen ribbon cable in place, and I'm going to gently nurse that connection out too. And the last thing we need to disconnect is the Wi-Fi antenna, and I couldn't get this out with the tweezers, so I just carefully used my fingers to do it. And that's it. We can take this PCB out. Just be very gentle when you do because you don't want those ribbon cables to snag on the PCB and break. And here's the old PCB in hand, so we're just gonna set this aside. We're gonna try to do something with this later. And now it's time to put the new control pad and buttons in. So let's go ahead and unbag these. So we got new buttons and we got new membranes to go with them. And I can tell you the button quality on the pad and the ABXY buttons has improved dramatically with this new install. So let's start with the control pad. Let's take the membrane off and just push up from the bottom, and the control pad should just come right out. Now let's grab the new one and put that in place. Should just fit right in. Now let's go ahead and put the membrane on. We just have to make sure the 2 tabs match the 2 pins that are sticking out. I actually ended up taking the left analog stick out because the ribbon cable was getting in the way and I didn't want to break it. So once you've done that, just put the membrane in place and you should be good to go. And just double check to make sure that you're on the plastic pins. Here you could see I was just a little bit off, so I had to do a quick readjustment. But once I got everything in place, it looked good. And you could see I'm just taking a little bit of extra time just to finesse this in and make sure that it's in properly, because I really don't want to have to take this unit apart again later. Now that that's all set, let's take care of the A, B, X, Y buttons, and I'm really intrigued that this is all one piece. I expected all 4 buttons to fall out separately, but it's just literally one little piece. So when you get this PCB unit, do not disconnect the A, B, X, and Y buttons. They're meant to be in as one piece. So now let's go ahead and put the new buttons in and the new membrane. Again, make sure you're putting this in as one piece, and just make sure your X button is at the top. Otherwise, your buttons are going to be upside down or sideways. And again, just take your time and just make sure to finesse that membrane in place, because you really don't want these buttons to be unresponsive and you don't want to have to open this unit up again later. Everything looks good, so let's put the left analog stick back in place. That should just slide right back in. There's another guide and a couple of pins there just to make sure that you don't put it in wrong, because that ribbon cable needs to be facing down like it is. And let's put the new PCB in. Just finesse it in, make sure you move the antenna cable out of the way if you need to. And you want to try to get the ribbon cables to come out of the holes so that we can put them into place. So just grab your tweezers, lightly grab them, and nurse them into the slots. And again, just take your time. We got the screen cable in, so now we're going to do the same thing with the analog cable. Alright, looks like we've got the PCB aligned properly, so let's just take our 4 screws and let's screw them back in just so that we have some stabilization when reconnecting everything else with the PCB. And before we go any further, just turn the unit around and check the buttons and the analog stick. Just make sure that they feel okay, because if not, you're going to have to go back in and readjust those membranes. But analog stick seems good, and we're just going to try the buttons next. Buttons seem to be responding properly, so let's go ahead and continue the installation. Let's reconnect the speakers and put those in place. And we can reconnect the antenna while we're at it. Let's put the shoulder buttons back in place. Let's start with L and R, and those should just slide into place along the guides. Then let's go ahead and screw the ZL and the ZR buttons back in as well. They should just slide right into place right over the screw holes. You may need to fiddle with them just a little bit. Again, just take it slow. You don't want to have to open this up again later. Now let's grab our tweezers and let's connect the ribbon cables back in. Let's start with the left analog stick. Again, just be gentle, go slow. Use a combination of your fingers and the tweezers just to kind of nurse it back into place. And again, I sped the video up because I really took my time with this. I did not want to break those cables. And once the ribbon cable is back into place, just make sure you flip the lid closed. So we got the left analog in place. Now let's put the screen in. It's a bigger cable, so it should seat in place a little bit quicker. And once it's in place, just go ahead and shut the lid closed, and we should be good to go. Now, when I first put this unit back together, I didn't check the power and volume buttons, so I had to go back in and make sure those were set in place. So I want to show you that part of the video now so that you know to check the power and volume buttons before you start putting everything back together. And the only thing that really happened was those buttons just kind of fell into the unit a little bit, so I just had to push them into place, and then I just had to test them to make sure that they connected with the board. So once they did that, I was able to reassemble. Alright, let's go ahead and get the back cover into place. So the next step here is to reconnect the battery and then reconnect the screw that holds that connector in place. And just be patient with this screw. It may give you a little bit of a hard time because while you're holding the connected back plate open, you're going to have less flexibility with being able to get this screw in. Now, with this screw in place, before I snap this unit back together, I just want to turn it on and see if we have power. And sure enough, we have a screen here. So now that everything seems to be working, I'm just going to snap the back plate closed, and the clips should just clip right into place. And we're going to put the final 4 screws back in to close this unit up. And finally, take the foam screw covers and just slide them right back in, and our new PCB is installed. So here we are at the main setup screen. My camera kind of wigged out here and focused on just the screen and took the Retroid Pocket completely out of the picture. So I do apologize, this is a little dark, but I do fix the lighting later on in the video. And this is a pretty straightforward setup. However, I did start to run into some trouble because the joysticks were not calibrated, so I got a warning. And I couldn't use the joysticks at all. I could only use the D-pad. Without a touchscreen, I couldn't use mouse mode, so I just skipped Wi-Fi setup and just went through with the tutorial. So pick your time zone. You want to make sure Google Play services are enabled, and you can actually pre-install some emulators right off the bat. So we're going to go through and install the ones that I know we're going to test, like Citra, Dolphin, Mupen 64 Plus FZ, PPSSPP, and all those high-end emulators that we really want to test here. If you did the PCB upgrade like me and you don't have a touchscreen on your device, I'm going to show you how to get around that and how to get these joysticks calibrated so that way you can use them. But in order to get there, we need to get through the home screen, so let's go ahead and let these apps install and finish the device setup. Now you have 2 launchers here and you could bounce back and forth between them, so we're just going to select the RP2 launcher for now and we're going to complete the setup. Now in order to get these joysticks calibrated, you're going to need to get into your settings and you actually are going to need to pair a Bluetooth mouse. I'm going to go ahead and use a Logitech mouse. And once we're paired, I'm going to use that to click here to calibrate the joysticks. And then just follow the prompts on the screen. First calibrate the left joystick and then the right joystick, and you should be good to go. They'll work from here on in. If you do have a touchscreen, you don't need to pair a mouse in order to complete this step. Now this is the old PCB, and I just wanted to show you that you can use the plastic pieces and screws to put the old PCB into this plastic, and they send you an AC adapter attachment and an extra Wi-Fi antenna. And I guess the idea here is that you could take your old PCB and make it a device that could plug into the TV. And I went ahead and assembled this, but I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't tell if I was getting power, and I definitely wasn't getting anything on the screen, so I'm not sure what I did, or if there's something else I need here, but I just set this aside for now and figured I couldn't use it. If anyone has any idea how to get the old PCB working as an HD out device, please let me know in the comments below. Alright, now that we're assembled and powered on and set up, let's see what this thing can do. So I fired up Genshin Impact just to see if I could actually play it on this device, and the short answer is no. It was running very sluggish even on low settings, and there's still no controller support on the Android version of this game. I did notice that Retroid did put in this sub-menu when playing games, and there is a screen mapping option, but without a touchscreen, I could not get this to work, so you may have more success if you actually have an assembled unit with a touchscreen. However, even then, I wouldn't recommend Genshin Impact on this device. However, I'm still impressed that I got into the game. However, if we backpedal a little bit and try some easier to run games, you're actually going to have a great deal more success. Here is Dead Cell's Android version, and it's running just fine. In fact, one of the reasons I originally got the Retroid Pocket 2 was to do some light Android gaming, as well as some game streaming through Stadia and Steam Link, and the original Retroid Pocket 2 could not do that well out of the box at all. You had to install a custom install of Android called Lineage, but out of the box, the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus blows the original out of the water in a lot of ways, making this a lot more of a pick-up and play device than its predecessor. Here's the Android version of Pinball Arcade playing the Star Trek Next Generation pinball table, my favorite pinball table growing up. And with controller support, you can use the L and R buttons to control the flippers. Here's the 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV, and there's full controller support here as well, and this is another Android app that's just running beautifully. If you've never played Final Fantasy IV before, this is not a bad way to get into this game. And Stardew Valley works very well too, but you are going to need to go into mouse mode or use the touchscreen to get through the initial setup. But once you finish that and get into the game proper, all the controller buttons work well, and this game is very playable on the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. And I just want to point out that as I was testing these games, the new buttons and D-pad was super responsive. The button upgrades really did this unit a service. And finally, here's Horizon Chase, and I remember this game working horribly on the original Retroid Pocket 2, but here, load times are great, game is snappy, and works just fine. So I think as long as you stick to light Android gaming, you should be fine to play a lot of controller-supported Android games on this device. Just don't go crazy trying to play Genshin Impact or Call of Duty Mobile on this thing. Now let's hit up the emulation side of this device and talk about the custom launcher a little bit. So let me show you how to add your ROMs to the launcher. And I'm going to demonstrate using NES. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the edit button on the bottom, and that's going to allow us to pick either our standalone app or our RetroArch core. So there are a lot of options here. I'm going to pick FCEUMM. Then go ahead and click Save, and then click Done. Now back out and let's go to ROMs. And here we're going to set our ROM directory. I have all my ROMs on an external SD card, so we're going to click Disk. And then I'm going to navigate to my ROMs folder, and I'm going to navigate to NES. Now, if you're in D-pad mode, it's going to take you into the folder, and you actually don't want to go into the folder. You want to check the box. So I'm going to hit B to go back, and then I'm going to hold the home button to enter virtual mouse mode. If you have a touchscreen, you can also use the touchscreen. And I'm just going to go ahead and click the checkbox next to NES. Go ahead and check the box next to the folder where your ROMs are, and then click Select. Now we need to check the box again and click Scan. And the device is going to take a few minutes, and it's going to add all of our ROMs from that directory to the front end. Now, in most cases, the front end is going to automatically download the box art, but if it does not recognize the game, you're just going to get the first letter of the game in a circle, in which case you're going to have to manually add the box art yourself. So let me just quickly show you how to add that box art. If you long press on a game, one of the options is box cover, and I already have the box art saved to my SD card, so I'm going to pick your device, and I'm going to navigate to the folder where all my box art is. Then in the exact same way, I picked my ROM directory. I'm going to pick the PNG file that matches the game, and the front end will automatically add the box art. And I moved these images over when I moved my ROMs to the SD card because I had run Scraper to put these on a Super Console X. So I had the files anyway and figured I would need them. Now you start to run into a lot of trouble with this front end when it comes to arcade games because there is a MAME and a Final Burn section, but it does not automatically download the box art. And at this point, your only options are to go on the GameDB, which is broken for some reason. I couldn't get any box art to download using this method. It would just take me to this empty page. Or you can try adding box art using Google Images, which can be hit or miss, but if you long press the image and click download, it'll automatically set it as the box art. Honestly, your best bet is to just scrape the box art and move it to the SD card, but then you have to manually assign the box art for every single game. And to me, this is just a long and tedious process, so really I just ended up not bothering with arcade games on this device. You're also going to run into trouble with PlayStation 1 ROMs if you are using bin and Q files. However, that's easy enough to fix because you could just long press on each bin file and click ignore this ROM and it'll just take it out of the menu. And you can go ahead and ignore every bin file and just leave the Q file. And once you do that, just go ahead and click on the Q file to open it and it'll boot right into your game. And you could do the same thing with multi-disc games like Xenogears. You can hide every single ROM except for the Q file, including the disc 1, disc 2, or however many discs the game has. Then let's go ahead and add the box cover from the ones I have saved on my device. And then let's go ahead and launch the game in order to test it. And you could see it launches just fine. And if you need to change discs, you can actually just do it from the RetroArch quick menu because you can go into disk control and load new disk. And RetroArch will just change the disk for you without needing to exit the program. So let's test out some higher end emulation, and we'll start with Citra, which unfortunately just worked horribly. It took forever for the shaders to load, and then once I got into gameplay, I could barely get into any menus, and this was just very unplayable. And on top of that, because I didn't have a touchscreen, I didn't have a good way of getting into any of the menus. So 3DS Emulation and Citra was just a complete miss for me, and I just ended up uninstalling the app. Which really is a shame because regular Nintendo DS with Drastic still works just as beautifully here as it did with the original Retroid Pocket 2, including a way to overlay the bottom screen over the top screen, and a way to map the pointer to the right stick and ZR so that you can utilize the touchscreen without having a touchscreen. I would actually consider the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus the best way to play Nintendo DS games that isn't a Nintendo DS. Unfortunately, Nintendo DS is not on the list of systems you can launch from the Retroid Pocket 2 launcher, so I just had to put a Drastic shortcut on the screen. Hopefully this will be fixed in a future update. So onto PSP Emulation, we're using PPSSPP playing God of War Chains of Olympus, and we're using an OpenGL backend here, a resolution of 1x, and a frame skip of 1, and God of War is still struggling on this device, but it is borderline playable. There are some small moments here where we do get full speed, but it's when there's not a lot of enemies on screen. Still not the best way to play this game, but I guess the option is there if you want it. However, the God of War games are really the only ones that are going to struggle. Here's Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII at a 2x resolution using the Vulkan backend, and we have full speed here. So I think as long as you stay away from the Gods of War, you'll get some very decent PSP emulation here. Alright, let's tackle the elephant in the room here, GameCube. And I'm sorry to report, it's not good. However, at this price point, I'm not gonna say it's bad either. But I wouldn't purchase a Retroid Pocket 2 Plus or a Retroid Pocket 2 Plus PCB upgrade if you're looking specifically for GameCube, because you're just not gonna get great performance. And the fact that we're getting any performance at all is a testament to this device. If you do a system update, and then you run the setup wizard again, you can actually download a special version of Dolphin MMJR2. And then if you go into the quick settings while the game is playing, and just make sure the skip and store EFB settings are checked. I don't know what they do specifically, I'm not really an expert on this, but they do improve the performance of GameCube emulation. And with this special version of MMJR2, you're actually able to set the resolution to below 1%. So here I'm operating at 0.5% with Wind Waker. And as sluggish as this game is right now, there are moments where I get bits of full speed. And the same thing is true for Twilight Princess. It doesn't run great, but it runs a little bit under grade. I would almost say that GameCube emulation is running somewhat decent. To try to help out with the frame rate, I'm running PAL versions of these games because they cap out at 50 Hz instead of 60 Hz, which makes it slightly easier to get full speed on a GameCube game. Now, things aren't running too great right now, but I would say that given time, there is hope for GameCube emulation. But I think it's going to be a matter of community involvement, as well as finding just the right settings to get these running a little bit more smoothly. But the potential is there, and the Retroid subreddit is already compiling a list of games that run okay on this device, as well as optimal settings. Now, I've never really been into Sega Saturn emulation because I've never had a device that can do it as well as the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus can. In fact, I don't even have any Saturn ROMs. I actually had to grab Nights into Dreams just for the purposes of testing, and it's running exceptionally well. Now, it's really the only game I tested, but it ran at full speed the entire time. And this was with default settings. I didn't tweak anything to get this running. Now back on my original Retroid Pocket 2, I had to tweak a lot of settings to get N64 emulation to work properly. And I just remember having to do a lot of research and ultimately find a universal profile that allowed me to play most games at full speed. And I didn't have to do any of that here to get near perfect performance on Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, which is actually a very hard game to emulate. I don't have many handhelds that can do it well. That said, out of the box, I did get a couple of hiccups and stutters here and there as far as frame rate. So I think if I did go back and change the emulation profile to the one that I used in the original Retroid Pocket 2, I'll probably get near perfect performance, if not perfect performance, from this unit. And here's where this device really impressed me. And that was with Dreamcast emulation. Starting with the fact that the original Retroid Pocket 2 could not use the Redream emulator, and we can run Redream on the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. And not only that, but we can run it very well. Out of all the devices that I have playtested Sonic Adventure 2 on, this is probably the only one that I actually felt comfortable playing the game with. And I'm not just talking frame rate here, I'm also talking responsiveness of control. Usually when I'm playing the City Escape level, I'm actually struggling to get through this part, and I'm not doing half bad, and I'm getting some grinding in, I'm getting some timing in, and usually I end up just hardcore struggling with the way the joysticks are on these devices. Here, I'm running okay. Alright, it's been almost 40 minutes putting together and playtesting this device, so let's wrap things up with Commendations and Condemnations. Starting with Commendations, this is a phenomenal emulation machine. And after the bad experiences I had with the original Retroid Pocket 2, I was very skeptical in upgrading it, but now I'm actually glad I did because I'm getting some of the best performance on this device that I've ever gotten, and I didn't have to tweak much in order to do it. Retroid also seems to have learned a lot in their operating system design, and it's really nice to see a good stock OS without the need to have to flash a customized version of Android. And this optimization not only allows for a better emulation experience, but it also allows us to run some Android games natively, which opens up the potential for this device a lot. The new buttons and membranes do seem to work and feel a lot better than the originals. And even the right stick, which was a slider on the original unit, feels a little bit more raised and feels slightly more responsive. It's still not as good as a proper analog stick, but it is an improvement nonetheless. And even though I opted to upgrade my original unit instead of buying a new one outright, the fact that the new units are shipping assembled with a touchscreen really makes this an easier device to use. And with me not having a touchscreen, there were really only one or two instances where I really wish I had it. And that's because the virtual mouse mode does the job 90% of the time. That said, if you do opt to upgrade your Retroid Pocket 2 yourself, you can also upgrade the touchscreen if you want. But then at that point, you might as well just buy a new unit already assembled. Alright, let's move on to Condemnations. And I want to start by talking about how disappointed I am in the emulation front end that they attempted to put on this device. Now, granted, it has a lot of potential, and it could be fixed with a software update, but when we're living in an age of retro handheld devices that has auto-scraping built into it, to not support box art for certain systems, and then to offer poor and time-consuming solutions to get that box art yourself is just inexcusable to me. And on top of that, systems like Sega Genesis are not even represented. However, I believe that Retroid is working on fixing that in a software update. And while the jump from 8 gigabytes to 32 gigabytes of onboard storage is a welcome change, that amount of storage space still seems too small. And if you're heavy into Android gaming, that will fill up pretty quick and you may need to format your SD card as internal, which I did on my old PCB and it wasn't a great experience. So at least I'm glad I can put the few Android games that I play on the hard drive itself without having to worry about it running out too quickly. And finally, it is nice to see that we can get limited GameCube on this machine. But the fact that it's there and it just doesn't work that well is kind of a tease. It's like showing you a candy bar and showing you the potential for how tasty that candy bar can be, but you're actually not allowed to eat it all the way. However, the community's working very hard to remedy this, so it may not be an issue down the line. But we also may have to accept the fact that the hardware may not just be capable of it. I do have to say, overall, I'm very happy I did this upgrade because it bumps the Retroid Pocket 2 from a device that was going relatively unused to one that I could potentially be using every day. So if you're on the fence about the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, hopefully this video gave you some confidence as to whether you want to upgrade or not, or helped your decision as to whether to buy this unit or wait for something a bit newer. Alright, this is a long video, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching, and if you watched this all the way to the end, a special thank you to you. Let me know what you think about this device in the comments below, and feel free to continue the conversation in the Team Retro section of the Budget Aquaman Discord channel. I'll leave a link in the description as to where to find that. Thank you again for watching, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.